Good afternoon, everyone. Andy Jacob here with the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. And we have a very interesting and exciting show today. Very informative show. We've got Mr. Chad Wekelo, who is the founder and principal at Actualize Consulting, one of the leading consulting firms in America. Chad's company specializes in four main areas, and they do such a good job. I had to get Chad on the show. They specialize in the financial services arena. They help banks, hedge funds, asset managers, private equity groups, and insurance companies. They help multinational corporations across all industries. They help businesses in the fixed income loan origination and servicing sector, and they help people in the public section equities business. So Chad is a go-to company. The Actualize Consulting is on speed dial across the country and even the world right now with his over 70 experts that help his clients. Chad, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today.
Yeah, a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
It's super great to have you. I know that you are one of the leading consulting firms in these four areas that we spoke about. You are on speed dial for a lot of companies that need your help. You work with multinational corporations, billion-dollar industries, billion-dollar companies. So let's pull the lens back just a little bit, Chad. Let's talk about Actualize Consulting from a high level and tell people what you do.
Yeah, so really, as you said, I mean, those are a lot of organizations that you mentioned, but we don't do everything for them, given the size of our organization. We're really specialized in some certain functions within those organizations, you know, the treasury functions, the operations functions, the finance functions, and within those, really helping companies with their process re-engineering. So really trying to help people think through their processes, streamline them, automate them, leveraging technology to help with regulatory components, to help with new business opportunities, analysis. So it's really that component of operationalizing that in a more efficient manner.
See, Chad, that makes a lot of sense. And you have a number of clients that reach out to you. Tell us what your philosophy at Actualize Consulting is with regard to the consulting offering. In other words, do you try and make yourself part of the company, or do you sort of stand outside the company, but allowing your clients to sort of do what they do best so that you can give them some breathing room, if you will, knowing that what they've asked you to handle is being handled by the experts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a little of both, right? We work very collaboratively with our customers, but with that said, we're there for a very specific purpose, right? They're bringing us in for expertise in certain area, whether it be technology platforms, whether it be regulatory components, process improvements. So we really try to be very focused in the scope, and to define that scope, work collaboratively with the client, but then we really try to execute on it. So we're working with them to define the scope, to make sure they get what they need, but then we're working independently to execute and to make sure that we're doing it efficiently.
See, that makes sense. And I know, Chad, at Actualize, you've actually had your team build some software that was needed by many industries, and you also will take software from perhaps other companies and insert it if you feel a need that that's the solution for your clients. So let's talk a little bit about onboarding, because when someone calls you, do they typically know what they need, or do you have to go through a process, or your team have to go through a process with them to actually figure out what they need?
Yeah, well, there's always a process to make sure we're aligned with the client. I would say a lot of people do. They know what they want to be. They know where they want to get. They just don't know how to best get there. So, I think that's what we're trying to do, is understand, okay, where do you want to go? And then trying to help them think through, is that even feasible? And so, we need to understand where their starting point is, and we need to understand where they're going. We had one client who had a point of delivery, point of arrival. So sort of like point of destination, point of arrival. Where are we today? And then where do we want to get? And I thought that was an interesting term, but that's what we need to understand. And then we use our expertise to help them navigate that, to get there efficiently, cost effectively, and without taking too much of their time to get there.
See, that makes a lot of sense. And with your offices throughout the world, there are companies that are going to reach out to you, multinational corporations. Let's just say someone reaches out to you from the UK or from France or from South America or from Latin America. Do you have a specialized team that works with each country, or how do you at Actualize sort of separate the types of people you're talking to be able to give them the best possible group from Actualize Consulting to work with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two components to it. In some of those geography, there's a language component, right? So a lot of people feel very comfortable working in their native language. So in some cases, like Latin America, we do have a special team. Some of them are based in Latin America. Some of them are based here in the US, but are Spanish speakers, right? So, or Portuguese, where the case may be in Brazil. But that's a component of it. But then, really, it's not just language. We need to make sure we have the expertise. So it's a component of those two factors that we look at when people call us. I would say the biggest component is the technical expertise, but then language is something that we sort of think is a differentiator because we're offering that as well.
See, I like that, and that's a great differentiator, as you just mentioned. Chad, when we have a company that reaches out to Actualize and they have a very, very specific need, how fast can you determine typically whether you're able to step in and help them out?
Yeah, I mean, if they call us about something that they should be calling us about, meaning something that's in their expertise, I think it's very quick, right? I mean, we've done this numerous times, and that's honestly why people call us, is because they're trying to shortcut the process. They're trying to give themselves more confidence that they're going to have a positive outcome. So, we're able to scope things out, I would say, within a matter of, I'd say a week, 2 weeks, maybe. If we're able to obtain the right information. Sometimes we have to dig deeper, and so we ask for more information to the client, and that takes them more time to compile it. But if they have the information readily available, given our experience, it should be a relatively quick process.
See, that makes a lot of sense because many of these corporations, whether they're a multinational corporation or a business, let's say in the fixed income loan origination and servicing space, they're maybe encountering a problem for the very first time. But what I hear you say, Chad, is that you've seen that problem dozens of times. So when they call you, you're able to get to the bottom of the need very, very quickly, most often because you've probably seen the problem that they're encountering.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, that's what people should be using consultants, right? Is for expertise and stuff that they haven't been exposed to, and they want a better outcome. So most definitely, that's our value proposition in those niche areas that we focus on.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's break down the 4 areas that you have a specialization in. Let's talk about the financial services sector. I know that Actualize is, like I said, on speed dial for a lot of mortgage bankers and asset managers, a lot of banks and hedge funds. You actually work, I know, with some governmental agencies as well. What part of the financial services industry is sort of your sweet spot?
Yeah, I mean, the area is really within we do work on the front to back, but I would say a couple of areas that are more specialized. One is on the collateral management side. So there's a lot of components of actually making sure that there's coverage. So collateral means that you have actual funds to cover your obligations for organizations. So we have expertise in collateral management. We have expertise in operations, specifically around the Treasury and payments side of things. So banks move a lot of money. There's a lot of money moving back and forth, making sure that's seamless, making sure they know where it is, making sure how they have money. There's also a lot of regulatory components, so that money has to move in a very specific fashion. All of that is very cumbersome for organizations, and that's an area that we specialize in.
Chad, where do you see the regulatory conditions going in the next 5 or 10 years, if you're thinking about it? In other words, do you feel that the regulations are going to become more cumbersome and more companies are going to have to reach out to specialists to help them sort of weave their way through the potholes of the cumbersome rules and regulations?
Well, most things, the way I see it, rules get made, they don't really get taken away very often. So it's always going to increase. I think it's a question of what's that pace of increase. Is there, usually you see a big uptick if there's events, right? If there's a fraudulent event, if there's some type of downturn in the economy, people are looking for blame, and it's sort of a popular thing to sort of say, oh, well, you need to add more regulation to solve these problems. So I think it's somewhat, well, we're definitely going to have it. Is there a trigger event that will drive that more frequently? That's the question. And, the good thing, I guess, to some extent is, the more recent trigger event, it's not really driven by regulation, COVID being the trigger event. So we'll see. I mean, I think some of the new people coming in the administration have had a history of being more burdensome from a regulatory perspective. So I would say there's a good chance that it will see more.
See, and that makes a lot of sense. And I know that you and your team stay abreast on everything. And as a matter of fact, you're part of, in some industries, you're on the inside. Your team is on the inside, actually helping to make the rules for that particular industry. So that gives you an advantage over a lot of other consulting firms at Actualize. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, there's a lot of committees, working groups, things such as that. I mean, the one thing people probably don't realize is regulations don't get made by people in the government, because if they did, we'd all be in trouble, because it's just not their area of expertise. So again, we're part of those committees where there's that expertise to make sure that the regulations are more thoughtful and are adding value overall.
See, that's a great lesson for some of the entrepreneurs watching the show today, that if you have an industry that rules and regulations change often or dramatically, or there's laws that are taking place that are affecting your industry, to join some groups or actually get in on the ground floor so you can help effectuate those changes is a very, very good idea. It's not easy, but if you can do it, it definitely is a powerful way to improve your company's position in your industry. Chad, let's talk about COVID just for a minute, because you mentioned it. What changes in the consulting industry have occurred specifically with Actualize due to the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, well, Actualize and consulting is really it's a services business, right? And we do project-based work, and we're used to, as you probably know, I mean, most people, there's a lot of travel involved in there. Some of that from a business development perspective, but a lot of it, just from even an implementation point of view, right? Working with our clients to get things done. It's been a change, put it that way, to try to still be successful, try to enact change at the same pace, being completely remote, has been probably the biggest change that we have had. For us, we did a lot of our work remotely already, so we were able to make, I would say, smaller tweaks and changes, but I know others in industry were probably larger, had larger impact to the way they did their business and had to change things. But obviously, when you're working with somebody and you're trying to get something done, and there's deadlines and there's change element, right? It's not like we're doing the same thing over and over again and we're just doing it remotely. No, we need to interact with those clients. We need to understand what they need. There's a lot of collaboration in project-based work. Doing that remotely has been a challenge, but we've managed to tweak the way we deliver our service to help deliver, hopefully fairly close to where we were before.
Yeah, I love that. And talking about sort of this connection of communication, let's talk about multinational corporations that reach out to you at Actualize. When they reach out to you, do they typically have one point of contact for the situation they're calling Actualize on? Or does Actualize have to sort of make contact points in all these various countries where they might have decision makers? And does that cause more complexity for Actualize to be able to provide the services that you do provide to your clients?
Yeah. Well, anytime you have more than one decision maker, it causes complexity. But when you add language, when you add geography, when you add time zones, all those things add more. So what we really look to do is to try to hone in on, at least in the decision-making process, a set of core buyers in the process. And then when we have to go to execute and deliver, then we can bring those people in to have more of a voice. So really, we try to understand who can make the decision. We try to engage people to make sure they have a voice in the process. but then we really try to hone in on the smaller group of people to say, okay, it's your decision. We've engaged these people to make sure they feel comfortable with the process, but let's make this, and then we'll re-engage with them once we actually have to execute.
So you have so many success stories internationally. It's very interesting the way you've been able to manage the multinational corporations in that way. That makes a lot of sense. And that's why you're one of the go-to consulting firms for people's needs out there and corporations' needs. When we're talking about the third sector that you have a good specialty in, which is fixed income loan origination and servicing, when we think of servicing a loan, we know that there's some super giant players in that arena, and I know that you've connected with those giant players. Maybe tell us a little bit about that process and how you've been able to do so well within that sort of substrata of industry.
Yeah, of course. There's, I would say, to go get a loan originated, get a loan serviced, there's a lot of very strict and formulaic processes that have to place. And I would say it's also an area that's very underserved from a technology perspective. So from a technology perspective, the process is very manual. People are filling out paperwork and going through there. So, where we really differentiate ourselves is, one is technology. So actually leveraging technology to try to digitize, automate that whole process. And two is as I mentioned, that's where you mentioned the product before, is on the technology side. There's a lot of regulations around that standpoint as far as what documentation needs to be in place, what data needs to be captured, who needs to be go to, and that whole continuum we've created a really large level of expertise around, so that it streamlines the process and makes people essentially be able to do what they want to do, which is service more loans.
See, I like that. And you streamline the process because companies need to reach out to consultants, because consultants have done the thing that they need done countless times if they're experts and they have the specialty. So they get to save also on time, because if they bring somebody in from the outside that's done it a number of times, they're going to save on time, and time is money. So tell us a story about a company that tried to do it internally, but it took so long and so many headaches for them that they decided finally to reach out to your company, and how you fixed the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we do get those calls sometimes after the fact. And, I think it's trying to think of a good story, but as far as whether it be people try to go through the process, one example that we see is there's a fatigue element. So a lot of times people have gone through these projects. People are putting their name on the line when they go through these opportunities, and it's just let's say making a car, right? You're trying to go through. You have to make a car. You could order all the box that has all the parts to make the car, but if you've never done it, think about how long is it going to take you to make that car? What are the odds that you're going to actually do it right? And if you do actually get it working, how long do you think it's actually going to stay working? So, it's just a similar process. And so on top of that, there's frustration level. People typically, clients we're working with, they still have day jobs. And so, you're adding burden on people, you're adding stress, and then you're also reducing your chance of success and causing, potential turnover. So what we've seen a lot of times is where people come to us, they come to us because people have quit, because they just got burnt out on the projects. They've come to us because essentially they have to go back to their management and ask for more funds to do this project. So it's sort of nice to think you can do everything yourself, but if you've never done it, I think that's where you should at least consider reaching out to a firm like ours.
See, that makes all the sense in the world. Let's keep the ball moving forward, because the fourth area or section that you have great expertise in is the equity section. Let's touch on that just a little bit, how your company can help in that field. Yeah,
and I think the sector is more of that we had laid out there as a public sector. I think you mentioned equities, but public sector is really where we meant. And what that encompasses is some components around the state and local governments. We include in there higher education. So actually some of the military branches we've done some work with. So it's those type of organizations. And honestly, it's the same problems they have. They have the same problems as our other sectors do. They just have a whole different working environment. Especially some of the governmental agencies, just the process, the level of sort of bureaucracy, unfortunately, to sort of get things done, it just makes, you have to attack it a different way. But the interesting thing is they have a lot of the same problems that our private sector clients do. So they're very excited because sometimes they feel like they're lagging the private sector as far as the technology, the operations. So getting some of those ideas into their organization is really helpful. And they want to be at that same level. It's just harder for them to get there sometimes.
See, that's interesting. Now, from your standpoint as the founder and principal, is there a different team that you would send in to a private sector versus public sector type company? Because maybe there's a different sort of environment or a different kind of a psychology between the two sectors, or is it the same people from Actualize that would work with those sectors?
Yeah, on our side, it's the same people because, again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take the same services, the same expertise, and see if it's applicable across those different areas. And what we found is it is. So no, it's the same people. And again, that's why I think some of them even, they prefer it that way because we're bringing those new ideas to bear, and that's what they really like.
That makes sense. And let's think about companies that are watching this right now. One of the things in everybody's mind that has a company, both small and large, is something that we call risk management. So in terms of how your company can help a company with their risk management, let's talk about that a little bit and peel that layer back a little bit.
Yeah. So when I think of risk management, it varies, right? When you think of risk management at some of our financial services firms, that they think about things a little bit differently because their risk management is more market risk management versus more operational risk. So I'll pick the more operational risk because I think that may apply to a broader range of people. But from an operational risk perspective, there's a lot of what we're dealing with is financial movements of information, and so under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, that all has to be attested to. So there's actually operational risk that if you submit information that's incorrect and you have restatement, that's a huge risk in the process. So that's an area that we actually see quite a bit of. We spend a lot of time in our projects is making sure that there's a consistent level of data that complies with everything that needs to go out, that's consistent across the organization. And so when people submit those financial results, which everybody relies upon as an investor perspective, they're consistent and they're accurate, and the people feel comfortable signing off on them. That's an operational risk component. There's a lot of times just even moving money. You read these stories about fraud. Fraud's a big component. And so some of the stuff that we're putting in place is actually to help use technology to identify potentially fraudulent transactions to get ahead of that, right? So I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to give people tools to proactively identify and mitigate risk. I think the old way of doing it was to at the back end of the process. Okay, well, how do we just mitigate risk? No, you can't do that anymore. Really, you have to be proactive. And so we're looking at using technology to put tools in place to help people give insights before it's too late.
See, that makes all the sense in the world, because by the time it becomes a problem, if you don't know about it early, then it's sometimes too late to fix it. And then you have to fix it for the future problems. But that problem that's sitting on your desk right there, that one's has to be dealt with and isn't going to go away. Let's talk about something that you touched on briefly, which I find to be a very, very interesting subject and on the top of everybody's minds in tech, which is data. And data protection is so important for the companies that you work with and so important for companies all over the world. Can you just touch on data collection, data security a little bit, and sort of how Actualize looks at data security from a high level?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we use a lot of data in our firm. We're not a cybersecurity firm from that perspective, so I won't talk about that. But from a data perspective, I mean, there's a lot of security. What happens today is previously most of your data was contained within a source and it just stayed there, and it's very hard for people to access it. Now what's happening is data is everywhere, right? Your data is moving back and forth. You have to get data from your different institutions, you have to bring it in, you have to send it out. So it's really that what we're looking at more is that protection, encryption of the data that's just moving in between the organizations, and really how do we protect that? There's one layer, which again, I won't talk about because we don't get as involved in, is how do I protect my own little environment from people coming into it? What we really think more is a lot of what we're doing is we're communicating data. People sending information to their counterparties, people sending information to their servicers, people sending information to their other banking partners. How does that information encrypted when it goes through? How is it obfuscated? So how does that information go there? So it really is very being mindful about that, being very controlled, and making sure we have a good protocol in place, and even protocols for if something fails, right? If somebody actually gets the data, what can they do with it? Is it actually encrypted at rest? Things such as that.
See, you've built a wonderful company, very powerful company. So one thing that comes to mind, maybe from someone watching the show who's, let's say, a younger entrepreneur, or someone that's perhaps even thinking about, making the phone call to Actualize and engaging with you. One thing that someone might think about is they're hearing you speak and they're wondering how you've been able to build such a strong operation. And I know that you help other companies with their operations, but I would imagine that, you talk the talk and you walk the walk. So how have you been able to build a strong operation for your company that sort of is the case study, perhaps, for some of the other companies that are calling you to help them with their operations?
Yeah, so we're lucky in a sense that is, what we do as our business is try to make people's operations better, as you said. So the good thing is we have a lot of people who are very interested and engaged in that. But so we leverage a lot of that activity and a lot of that knowledge and thought process to help achieve that. But I think ultimately what we've done is we tried to always grow for scale. And so we've tried to put technology in place proactively before we actually needed it, so that we could continue to scale and grow. And so we sort of have been very technology, I guess, on the forefront of that from a SaaS perspective. We've always had our data in the cloud. We've always tried to integrate, leverage these technologies. And the good thing is, if they don't work, if you don't like them, it's not hard to get rid of them, right? You just shift something to something else. But I think building that infrastructure is one thing that's important, so that we've always felt like we could grow without, and we didn't have to stop growing because we didn't have the infrastructure in place. So proactively doing that and investing is one piece. But another piece is just the team and the culture. Really, I would say, actually our head of operations actually has books about culture, and so I think we sort of now culture is very in vogue, but we've been doing that for years. And so I think having that ingrained as part of us is important. And now it's all the rage, but we're like, well, why weren't you always doing that? And so I think that type of mentality is something that's really helped us as well.
See, I like that very much. And you mentioned something about sort of evolving and growing. So when a company calls you to help them solve a situation at their company, when you go in, how often do you find other things that you have to sort of send up the chain, if you will, and say to that company, there's some other things here that we found that maybe you want to start thinking about now for your future. And if we can actually start working on them now, then you'll be prepared for the future. Does that happen quite often in your business?
I think that probably every project it happens in. But I think it's the question of, there's always things that way. I think in anybody, if you really look hard at your business or you look hard at what you're doing, you're going to find opportunities. And so what we try to do is, it's how do we communicate that, right? So it's not like, okay, we just tell people that you should think about this. It's like, okay, well, what we think about it from a scale, it's what's the level of effort to achieve that? What's the value proposition to the organization? And so we try to think about it from a multi-dimensional perspective, and we try to lay that out for them, even visually, so they can actually figure out how to action that, right? Because if you just go to them and tell them, yeah, this is messed up, that's not very helpful. So we try to provide solutions, and we also try to sort of say, this is something, maybe it's even not your highest priority, but it's a quick win. And, we suggest that you do that. So we try to lay it out in ways that they can actually execute upon that.
See, that makes sense. And in business, things start at the top, and they typically start with that attitude or that mindset from the top. So I want to change gears here just a little bit for our entrepreneurs watching the show, Chad, because you've been able to build this strong multinational organization with a lot of people working at Actualize. When you're thinking about hiring in, when you're thinking about your hiring process of bringing people in under your umbrella that are really going to speak for you and listen for you and be sort of an extension of Chad Wekelo, what's the single most important thing you're looking for when you're hiring talent to join your team?
Yeah, if I had to pick one thing, I'd probably say a growth mindset. I want people who are constantly looking to evolve, to grow, to challenge. That's really important in what we do, as an organization. If I can pick a second one, I would say, cultural fit. We have a certain way of doing things, and people who really buy into that are very successful here. And so that we spend a lot of time making sure that people are a right fit for what we're trying to do culturally as well.
See, that makes a lot of sense to make sure they fit in with what you're trying to do from a cultural standpoint. You've been doing this for many years, so this is something that's not foreign to you over at Actualize. Let's turn the table just a little bit, and I'd like to finish the interview since I still have you on this Zoom call. And it's a question I like asking some of our more powerful founders and principals. We have a lot of younger entrepreneurs that watch the show, and they're watching you, Chad, and they're saying to themselves, wow, like, how did he do it? Was he always successful? Did he ever skin his knee? Did he ever fall on his behind and get himself back up and dust himself off again? So for those younger entrepreneurs that maybe in their own business or their own startup maybe are having a little bit of a challenge, or something went away that maybe they weren't expecting, could you give some sage advice and some words of wisdom to those entrepreneurs that maybe it's not going as well as what they were planned, or isn't going the way they were planning?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that it's important to think about is whatever grand vision you have, and no matter how well thought out it is and how perfect it is, it's never ultimately going to be exactly the way you thought it was going to be. So, keep that in mind and be flexible in the process, right? You need to try things, but then be open to, pivoting as things evolve to you. The customers, the business will tell you where it needs to go, and be open to hearing that, and don't be stubborn because, oh, this is the way I thought it was going to be, and I'm going to keep moving down this direction no matter what signals I get that tell me I shouldn't be going down this direction. So, that's the thing that I think I've sort of learned more is, don't overplan. I'm a big believer of not overplanning, maybe to an extreme, but let the markets tell you where to go and evolve as it goes, and be open to going that. And even if that wasn't exactly where you thought you were going to be, that's where you should be, because that's where it's told you to go.
See, I love that, because the market's going to tell you where to go. And what we see, Chad, is a lot of younger, unseasoned entrepreneurs. They get so enticed by their own technology, and they get so excited about what they're doing, their widget that they've got, that they forget about the customer. They forget that the most important thing is you have to have customers that buy from you and love you. So let's just finalize our interview today with that in mind. At Actualize Consulting, we know that you always start with your customer at the forefront. So maybe you could just touch on that a little bit and sort of embed that idea that it's all about the customer, and it's the customer or the client that makes a company successful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, and for us especially, right, we're in a services-based business. So, we don't have this, we do have some technology, but, in general, we're sort of providing that service level. But, you have to have the customer in mind always. I would say, for me, the way I think about it is you have to have the customer's interest ahead of your own. And even if it's to your detriment, I mean, there's many times I'm telling the clients things that not the best outcome for us, but I think it's the right thing for the customer. And so I think what that means essentially is we have a very long-term view of things. We're in it for the long run. And whether we're not in it for these short-term wins and short-term gains at other people's expenses, or at least not our clients' expense. And so I think if they have that mindset and they always put it there and they're true to themselves, right? Even if you're struggling, you got to be true to that mindset. And if you, in the long run, you'll be successful.
Yeah, I love it, Chad. That's great advice. And you actually have been able to talk the talk and walk the walk and build a company like Actualize Consulting. It's a real honor to have you on the show. And I think this has given people a good idea of what you're able to do at Actualize and sort of brings you into the mind of a successful entrepreneur in Mr. Wekelo here, because he has put together something that is very, very unusual in that his business works in a multinational way with people that really care about the clients, that have the passion to provide the type of expertise and consulting that they need in the various industries that he and his company are able to work with. So Chad, thank you so much for coming on the show today. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.